Hey there. Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee Lavallee McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about how we can respond to our life rather than react to it. So when we respond to someone rather than react to them, we're being considerate, deliberate, and very conscious about what we're doing and saying. Reacting, on the other hand, literally means one action meeting another. And our reactions are usually immediate, unconscious, and generally, in my experience, not our best self. And as someone who spent much of my life reacting to circumstances, situations, and relationships, rather than responding to them, now that I know the difference, being able to respond in a thoughtful, intentional way is more empowering, more life-affirming, and supportive of my authentic self, and actually creates opportunity for greater intimacy, personal growth, and better communication in almost every area. Reacting, on the other hand, often put me in a place of feeling victimized or like people were doing things to me. I frequently had regret for what I did or said, and it frequently created inner conflict and confusion because my reactions were often in situations where I needed to respond to what was happening, but the way that I did it was so crappy that I wasn't able to get my point across. Often I needed to apologize, and the underlying issue never got addressed. And I just love little tips and tools for personal growth. And I found in reacting versus responding, it's the 2 Ps versus the 4 Ps. And the 2 Ps of reaction tend to go like this. Something happens, you panic, and then you proceed. And when we respond, the 4 Ps go like this. Something happens, you pause, you process, you plan, and then you proceed. Whoa. Reaction is quick, immediate. Responding is slower. It creates more space between the event and what we do or don't do. And in that space we're creating, by pausing, processing, and planning before we proceed, we give our immediate emotions some time to breathe. We can better understand what's happening and make our decisions on how to respond from the best, most evolved part of our brain rather than from the reptilian fight, flee, or hide part, which can save our life in truly dangerous circumstances, but most of the time it gets us in trouble. At least it does for me. So I was out to breakfast the other day with a group of people, a few of whom I know really well, and a couple that I just met. We'll call them Jack and Barbara. And Barbara had ordered eggs, bacon, and a pancake, and Jack had a breakfast burrito. We had lots of actually really interesting conversation. We've traveled to some of the same places in the world. He's a musician and a war veteran, and she's worked with nonprofits in Africa. And years ago, I actually had an art nonprofit called Art in Every Classroom, and we used to grant art materials to underprivileged schools and programs, primarily in California, but also in Central Africa and Haiti. And I've actually been considering taking a trip to Africa for my 60th birthday, which is in a couple of months. So Barbara was telling me how wonderful the Rwandan people were. That's primarily where she's been. And how beautiful the continent is. And we even talked about the next time she goes, maybe I could join her. Because for me, going to foreign places is always fun if you're with somebody who actually knows the lay of the land or has local connections. And Barbara was only picking at her pancake. I wasn't paying very much attention. And while the waiter was clearing the plates, she said to him, "My pancake was uncooked." And apparently he didn't hear her. And she said, "Don't ignore me." And he said, "Excuse me?" She said, "My pancake was uncooked." And he said, "Well, we'll give you a refund." And she said, "I don't like your attitude." And he said, "Listen, I don't cook this food." And he took the plates back to the bus station, and Jack jumped up from his chair and ran over and got in the guy's face. And the waiter yells, "Step back." And Jack says, "You can't talk to us that way." And now the restaurant is silent and everyone is staring at them. And I was thinking, I ain't going to Africa with this lady. And she stands up, grabs her coat, says, "I'm never coming here again," grabs Jack by the arm, drags him away, and they go very loudly up to the cashier to pay their bill. And I'm thinking, whoa, that was not about a pancake. And of course, the restaurant didn't make them pay for the pancake, but they're probably barred from the place. And I certainly won't be going to get a meal with them again, although they both might benefit from a couple of therapy sessions, because they're caught in reactions and unable to respond appropriately to a circumstance. And that's not to blame or shame them. I'm sure that's the behavior that was modeled for them. And I am quite aware that Jack has a lot of unresolved trauma from his time in Iraq as a frontline soldier. So it's really important as we develop the capacity to respond, taking time to pause, process, and plan before we proceed. It's important that we have self-compassion in understanding our reactions, or at least acknowledging that they come from an older, probably younger, more disempowered place. And I'm going to guess that Barbara was ignored or at least not listened to as a child. And so the waiter not hearing her triggered an old wound of probably being unimportant and uncared for. And when we can be mindful and notice our reactions rather than justifying or being embarrassed by them, when we can be curious and kind of unpack them, they always point to deeper unresolved emotional issues that will be really beneficial if we can become conscious about them, unpack them, and care for those parts of ourselves. Now, this definitely requires some back-end work, but just like keeping our house clean and orderly, we got to go through that stuff in the basement or the closets or the garage sometimes, or we get overrun with old stuff. And over time, it can clutter our environment and make our space unpleasant to live in. And the same is true for our psyche. It's incredibly beneficial to have a regular practice of inner assessment and clearing so that we can stay in our best adult ego state, which is always the optimal place to be. And the real downside of reacting rather than responding is this disempowerment that I mentioned earlier. I think about my client, Maya, really smart, organized professional. She's a project manager and really gifted at being able to see a multitude of various parts and how they all work together in an optimal way. She's terrific at what she does. Her husband's got a little bit of a drinking problem, and she's been doing a lot of work in Al-Anon to separate herself from her husband's drinking issues and her own desire to control everything. And so Maya's pattern is to hold everything in and then explode. And the things that she's exploding about are actually real issues that need to be addressed in their marriage and family life. But because she explodes, she ends up having to apologize for her behavior. And then the actual issues that she was trying to address never get addressed. She never learned how to respond to her needs or to other people's bad behavior or just genuine life issues that need to be negotiated in a calm and respectful and helpful way. She has some inner narratives that her needs are less important than the needs of others. And although intellectually she knows that's not true, emotionally she was raised in a culture where you don't talk about your feelings. And particularly for women, caring for others was valued over caring for yourself, which was even viewed as being selfish rather than self-care. So all these little things will happen and she can tell herself, that's not a big deal, that's not a big deal, that's not a big deal. Not noticing that drip by drip, the pot is filling up until one more drop boils it over, the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. And she'll just lose her shit, start screaming, occasionally even throw things. And then she feels all this guilt and shame. She feels terrible for acting that way, but her inner anger about all these little dysfunctions never gets resolved because the reaction is so extreme. It actually justifies her husband in saying, you crazy. And it discredits these deeper authentic issues. So she's actually disempowering herself with her reactions. And so when we get triggered, and the word trigger is quite appropriate because it's like pulling the trigger of a gun, bang. And if you want to learn how to respond rather than react, practicing these 4 Ps is an excellent way to do it. And so the first thing we want to do is pause. And it's probably the most important because the way that reactions work is that we get triggered, just like that gun going off. And it happens so fast, we get taken over by the emotion and our conditioned or habitual response to it, whether it's anger and defensiveness, or shutting down and withdrawing, getting overwhelmed with fear, resentment, self-doubt. When we're in reaction, our unconscious defensive structures just take over, or we get overwhelmed by the body sensations or emotional experience that got triggered, and we lose access to our healthy adult ego state. And it's very easy in reaction to get taken over by a patterned way of responding. And it's kind of like being on a roller coaster ride. Once you get to the top of that first hill, that baby's going all the way through the cycle. And it feels like there's no way to get off until it's done. And so pausing is how we get out of the car of that amusement park ride. You know, one time I was in Space Mountain in Disneyland, and the ride broke down, and they had to turn on all the lights, and we had to walk out. It was really interesting. If you've never been to Space Mountain, it's an indoor roller coaster, and it's totally pitch black inside this enormous building that houses it. And while you're flying up and down and around, they're projecting cosmic and celestial imagery and videos till they turn the lights on, and you just see it's a giant roller coaster warehouse. And so pausing is how we turn the lights on. And pausing is a practice, and we get better at it with practice. And I have found it very helpful to set conscious intentions for the behavior that I want to start to develop and create in my life. So you could do it right now or at some other neutral time and just say to yourself, I want to practice pausing when I get triggered or upset. I'm going to grow in the skills and abilities to pause and respond rather than react. Progress, not perfection, and it requires presence and self-awareness to pause, to even notice, whoa, I'm going down that roller coaster of reaction again. And sometimes we have to get drawn down that amusement park ride that may not be that amusing, of rage, of fear, of shame, or resentment. And maybe we don't notice it until after it happened. Whoa, that was a reaction rather than a response. That's growth. That's excellent. Next time you're going to notice it sooner. Developing this level of self-awareness and self-presence is like miracle grow for our emotional maturity, self-love, and empowerment. So we take this pause so that we can process. And just noticing what's happening in your body. Whoa, my throat closed up. Whoa, I want to punch that person in the face. Whoa, I just got overrun by anxiety. There's a clenching in my stomach. Reacting is really quick. Responding is much slower. And it can take a lot of courage or deliberation to not scratch that itch and jump back on that reactionary train. And it may feel like it provides some relief in the moment, but in the long run, reactions tend to be destructive, either to ourselves or others. And responding tends to be much more constructive. And I have found it incredibly helpful to name out loud just what's happening in my body. Now, you might be able to just name it to yourself, and although naming it seems like it might give it more power, the opposite is true. Bringing consciousness to these unconscious parts of ourselves generally dissipates what's happening and puts our best adult self, our awareness self, in charge. Often these reactive parts are unresolved emotional issues from childhood, and when we get into a reaction, we may be acting out of a wounded 2-year-old or 5-year-old or a 10-year-old rather than from our grown-up self. And although the wounded parts of myself ran my life for many years, I don't want a 5-year-old driving the bus anymore. She can barely reach the pedals. She needs attention and care, but from my best adult self, growing in self-parenting in a healthy, compassionate, responsible way. So first we pause, and then we process. What's happening in my body? You may instantly be aware, or it may take you a few moments, and those will not be moments you regret. Because just like the pancake lady and her enraged PTSD surviving husband, the reactions they had over an uncooked pancake, from my humble opinion, were out of alignment for the severity of what was actually happening in the present moment. And one of the hallmarks or foundations of my spiritual psychology work is growing in presence and helping, healing, caring for the parts of ourselves that are stuck in historic and psychological time, often riding on terrifying and destructive amusement park rides that don't actually even exist anymore in present time. So as we name what's happening inside our bodies, emotions, and notice the mental chatter, it's important to be compassionate with ourselves, to affirm, I'm doing the best I can, to take a deep breath, or 2, or 3. And now that I've collected myself and come present into my body, I can make a plan for what I'd like to do going forward. And frequently the best thing to do is nothing, particularly if I'm reacting to someone else's bad behavior. Matching bad behavior with bad behavior has everyone behaving badly. And it's very interesting if someone's having bad behavior and I really ground myself, the spotlight is on them. They actually even have their own opportunity to notice their bad behavior. Because when I just join them in it, we're just having a bad behavior party. And there are certainly reactive patterns that we can practice in relationship. And it can be really uncomfortable to not participate in that cycle. If you have the same fight over and over again with your partner, friends, or family members, try not reacting and just observe what happens. Very powerful. So once I've paused, taken a moment to process what's happening inside myself, making a plan for what to do next. How important is this? How would I choose or like to respond here? And when in doubt, leave it out. You can always go back and have a secondary conversation. And so once I've paused, processed, planned, then I can proceed. So I wish you well in practicing presence and responding instead of reacting, growing in your own self-awareness, self-care, and self-compassion, which automatically helps us grow in love, care, and compassion for others. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like some help in healing your deeper underlying emotional reactions, you might consider a block of spiritual psychology work with me. Shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. We'll set up a free 30-minute discovery call. And if you're looking for a last-minute holiday gift, I do 90-minute tarot readings. I don't talk about that very much, but they're quite fun. And over the years, I've had many people buy them as gift certificates for family and friends and spiritually minded people who are difficult to buy for. Intuitive tarot readings are also a really potent way to set intentions for the new year. So you might even want to gift yourself a tarot reading. So drop me an email, whether it's for yourself or someone else, for a really fun, interesting, informative 90-minute session of intuitive tarot with me. Super fun. I hope you'll consider it. If you like this podcast, appreciate a good review on iTunes or 5 stars on Spotify, share it with a friend. Please check out my YouTube channel, and I'm offering lots of free work on Insight Timer every month, including this Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, Transforming Trauma, one of the pinnacle pieces of work that will really help you deactivate these emotional reactions and triggers and grow in exactly the kind of self-care that I'm talking about. Thanks as always to my generous supporters on Patreon and through this podcast. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee Lavallee McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.